Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues, welcome to our program, Resilience Talks, where we'll discuss Sweden's EU presidency and the Ukraine crisis, a timely debate on resilience and security, which promises to be an engaging and insightful discussion. We are honored to have with us today Her Excellency Therese, the Ambassador of Sweden to Romania, as well as Oana Popescu Zamfir, the Director of Global Focus Center, who will share the valuable perspectives on the current security landscape. As many of you know, Sweden made a historic decision to join NATO alongside Finland in 2020, marking a significant shift in the region's security dynamics. With Sweden being a champion in building national resilience across all sectors, we are eager to learn from their experience and best practices. Our conversation today will delve in the various factors that influence Sweden's decision to join NATO, as well as the impact of the Russian aggression in Ukraine on the nation's security priorities. We will also discuss the key elements of Sweden's approach to building national resilience and explore potential avenues for collaboration. Furthermore, we will touch upon Sweden's role within NATO, its contributions to regional security in the Baltic Sea area, and its plans for addressing challenges like cybersecurity and hybrid challenges. Oana Popescu Zamfir, with her extensive experience in international affairs and her roles as the Director of Global Focus Center, will provide valuable insights and facilitate a productive exchange of ideas. Once again, I would like to warm welcome you here, Ambassador Hyden and Oana Popescu Zamfir, and thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
We appreciate your expertise and for exchanging ideas today. So I will be addressing the questions that goes for both of you, and each and every one of us, you with its own insight and answers. First question. Madam Ambassador, Sweden is widely recognized as a global leader in building national resilience. Could you please share some insights into the key factors and strategies that have contributed to Sweden's success in this area? In particular, how has Sweden fostered collaboration among various stakeholders, engage its citizens, and prioritize areas such as critical infrastructures and cybersecurity?
Thank you for that small question, but it's a good way to kick off this debate. Pleasure to be here on this program today. I would say I think a lot of the results we see today is because of one factor, which is trust. I believe Sweden is still the society, the country where the citizens have the highest trust in their institutions, in the government, in the parliament, and in other government functions. Vice versa, the public institutions also trust the citizens. And I think there perhaps what we saw happening in Sweden during the COVID pandemic was also a reflection of that sort of mutual trust, because we never had a lockdown, but people did take certain measures as they were recommended to do. So just as a small example, perhaps, of how that sort of both resilience and that trust worked in practice. Question is, of course, where does that trust come from? You don't just snap your fingers and you have it. It is for sure something that we have had, because it's been measured. It has been measured by some institutes over time, and we've had this with very little variations for a number of decades. Ultimately, it will, of course, come from the fact that if you earn the trust, to earn the trust, you need to get something for it. So, of course, in Sweden, we do have a social security system. We pay our taxes, but we get something for it. The citizens people in Sweden seem to be sufficiently pleased with what they are getting from the state. And that's, of course, how you manage to maintain this social contract, because the trust is really what keeps our social contract together. It is, of course, never something to take for granted. And I think this is the challenge we are seeing today in my country also. We do have issues of segregated communities, so we need to take this discussion, and we need to work harder on this. To build this trust is also, of course, to teach kids in school a couple of things, such as, for instance, how to be resilient, how to work against disinformation, how to detect disinformation. That's one thing. And another thing, I believe, is, which is also part of the Swedish educational system, it's not something that is, it's not a course in itself, but it is the mere methodological way of teaching in Sweden, which is based very much on the questions and answers, the right to sort of question something, the possibility to debate, question your teacher, to try trial and error, basically, and ultimately teamwork.
So this enhanced social contract that you're talking about, because you have studied many countries in the region, and you have focused a lot on resilience, disinformation, phenomenon, hybrid. How do we build this enhanced social contract? What do we do wrong if we do something wrong, or what can we do better?
Well, are we even trying? I would say across the region, not just in Romania. I don't think that we have considered the social contract enough so far. I think, strangely enough, the resilience in our region, including Romania, actually stems from the healthy distrust of government. We have completely different circumstances than the Scandinavian countries. Romania ranks first, I think, in the EU in terms of lack of confidence in both state institutions and in one another, which is an actual problem when it comes to building societal resilience. But what we do have from our experience of communism and dictatorship and so on and so forth is something that is conducive to both democracy and resilience. Namely, we never take anything that any government does for granted. We never really buy what we are being sold by the political class. On the one hand, that can be healthy, and it can be a good reservoir to start building resilience from. On the other hand, it can be destructive, and I'm afraid it is at this point, and it provides ample room for radical anti-establishment forces to grow, because just as we don't trust the government, unfortunately, successive governments and the political class hasn't really trusted the people and hasn't even tried to build both from the top down and bottom up. While we mistrust the government, at the same time, we have a legacy and we have a pretty disturbing basis of autocratic tendencies. We tend to like strongmen, we like strong figures. So it's a mix that we haven't negotiated with after communism, not yet, not enough. And I think the way I see things right now is that it's really high time, and I think we're going to see this next year when we have elections throughout Europe and the region. We are going to see the very dangerous progress of far-right radical forces. Hopefully, this is going to be a trigger for the region to look at its democratic mechanisms and to look at societal resilience and ask the fundamental question, well, how have we lost the citizens? How come they don't want to participate in the democratic process anymore? How come that we have high levels of civic participation, but not political participation and not elections turnout, for instance? And how can we regain the trust of citizens? Because indeed, I'm afraid that is true. It's healthy to question everything, including your government. But when the trust, the bond of trust is completely broken, there is very little that can be built on that sort of basis.
My next question was about citizens' resilience. Through my research, and I hear this is a thing in Sweden, where resilience really starts at the bottom with citizens, with ordinary citizens. And you mentioned before school that it all starts there. How do you see this in Romania? Is it Do we have any platform, or do we have any grounds to do something similar, or are just social contracts just broken?
To be honest, I would have to say no. I mean, look at the education system. It's good that we are at least talking about it with a lot of dissatisfaction, and I think there's been much discussion about it precisely because of its shortcomings. But for too long now, it has not been built on critical thinking. It has not been built on a healthy relationship that puts the child and the child's interests at the core of the education process. It is hierarchical. It's a bit of a school of how should I put it? Ideally, it would be a school of democracy, and it's the opposite. Maybe not not a school in anti-democratic tendencies, but it definitely doesn't teach children how to relate to authority, how to question it from a position of mutual respect, what to expect to be given, how to expect to be the beneficiaries of the system. I think that very much reflects our behavior as citizens later on. And we do have, I think there's a lot to build on, precisely because Romanian society has had to develop often despite government, rather than thanks to government policies. So we have the resilience that comes with self-reliance, with the fact that we have had to cater for ourselves. But there is so much polarization at this point, and people are so vulnerable to disinformation, to political radicalization, and so on, that we really need a deliberate drive to try and find again what are the values that we share, what's the common base that we share and that we want to grow on. What kind of society is Romania supposed to be in the future? I think, building societal resilience really starts with these core questions.
Did we have this conversation after the fall of the communism?
No. And at this point, the worrying thing is the moderates, both left and right, conservatives and progressives, have very little common ground to discuss these things. And unfortunately, I think they fail to realize that they are, at this point, each other's partners and allies in fighting off the radicals on both sides. So hopefully we will acknowledge that we need to relearn to build democratic consensus by clearly rejecting the anti-democratic messages and forces and learning to discuss across the board despite our differences.
Let's see. Thank you. Moving on a little bit on Sweden's presidency of the Council of the European Union, considering the priorities, which includes security, competitiveness, green energy transition, democratic values, and rule of law. Could you please elaborate on one specific initiative or policy that you believe will have a significant impact in advancing these priorities during your presidency?
Well, I think the single most important thing that we're doing as the presidency, but more importantly with all the EU member states, is supporting Ukraine, because that is really what we need to do for our own security, for Europe's security. It's for now, for today, but it's also for the future. It's about defending our societies, our social contracts, which is built on open societies, democratic systems, freedom of speech, freedom of the media, etc. And of course, what we've done so far, I think one important issue is, of course, that we've been able to maintain unity. All right, that's.
That is not easy with 20.
It's not easy, but we've managed, and by we I mean it's a collective we, not just the Swedish presidency. But that is one thing, of course. Also, we've taken a number of specific measures, such as, I think, well, now we're at the 10th sanctions package, and more will come as the war continues. We've taken a historic, as the EU, a historic decision on joint buying of ammunition for Ukraine.
That's huge.
That's a huge thing, obviously. And let's remember this is the EU doing these things. It's not NATO.
Like 4 years ago, they would be unimaginable to even consider such an idea.
Yeah, but it's also because we are in an unimaginable situation a little over a year and a half ago. So,
because you understand very well the mechanism of the European Union and the presidency of the European Union, how difficult it is for Sweden to keep people in line and to keep supporting Ukraine as long as it takes for...
Oh, I don't envy them. What can I say? I think negotiations within the EU have been unexpectedly smooth as compared to a few years ago and what we might have expected. I think the support for Ukraine is pretty much unanimous, with a few notable exceptions that we know: Hungary, Austria, and various of their objections. But overall, I think the EU is pretty much on the same side. I'm afraid we're going to see more fracture as the war drags on. So, that being said, so far we have negotiated a crisis response, immediate measures, things that were absolutely necessary for our own resilience and security, not just for Ukraine's. I think as we move into the territory of the more strategic, longer term thinking and the question of how are we going to face the revisionism that comes from Russia and China as a united front, this is going to open new debates that are going to be harder to sail
for the
through.
long term. Yeah.
So I think Sweden, the Swedish presidency has, on the one hand, has been limited in the level of ambition that it could project, precisely because of the circumstances and because it's had to navigate some really key immediate issues and important matters at stake. But at the same time, it has benefited from the fact that there has been a significant degree of unity within the EU.
Yeah. Now, moving on a subject that is it's pretty hot, if we can put it like that, in Romania, the Schengen process. Considering Romanians' ongoing efforts to join the Schengen area, as you are well aware, and following our Prime Minister visit to your country, could you please share with us Sweden's position on this matter?
Certainly. I mean, this is not, it's not only Romania's efforts to try and join Schengen. It's really, it's a priority for the Swedish presidency. And just to start noting, of course, that Sweden voted for Romanian Schengen in December. Unfortunately, Romania was blocked because of two countries, or one country and one country with the situation with Bulgaria. And so in one sense, Romania is still stuck. And we understand as the president, it's an unfair situation. It is for reasons that are not linked to Romania, that Romania does not, or have already showed in terms of technical improvements, etc. And Sweden was part of those evaluation missions that took place last fall. There were two of them that Romania invited to, and we took part in both. It felt it was important for us, and it helped us take this decision to be fully supportive of Romania. We're continuing with that. We're continuing with the consultations. And in fact, the day before Prime Minister Čuka visited Stockholm and met with the Swedish Prime Minister, the Swedish Prime Minister met with the Austrian Chancellor, Nehammer, in Stockholm. And they had, I do know that they had quite an extensive talk on the Schengen issue and also on migration topic, because that's where the problem lies. Now, we are, of course, fully aware these two topics are not linked, but this is where the problem lies for Austria. So, of course, the hope is that within a wider within a wider perspective of solving these issues, and not necessarily, that doesn't mean we need to have a full agreement on the full asylum and migration package, but to move forward on certain issues that should help to deblock. What Romania is doing, I just want to mention it here, which I think is highly appreciated also by the Austrian Chancellor, is, for instance, this pilot project to show your experience with the border with Serbia, for instance. So, of course, Romania is part of this, and I think the constructive approach of Romania is very much welcomed by the Swedish presidency, helps us to continue to keep this on the agenda. We will see where we are at before the end of the Swedish presidency. If not, if we are not at the end there, for sure, we will make it clear to the Spanish incoming presidency to take this issue further.
Oana, do you have any thoughts? Do you think it would be possible for Romania to join the Schengen area during the Sweden's presidency? Or what are the chances?
Slim, but they're there. If they're better than the chances we have with the upcoming trio of presidencies, and especially in the context of the electoral year 2024. So if we do have a chance, it's pretty much now. At the same time, what the Swedish presidency, what any EU Council presidency can do is relatively limited. I mean, it can be creative in trying to bring the parties to the table and have them to negotiate, as rightly pointed out, perhaps in new ways that might open some avenues for a constructive outcome. But other than that, unfortunately, we see this practice become more and more frequently used. The harder it is within the EU to reach agreement on contentious issues such as migration, the more different member states are tempted to oppose their veto rather than take the much more painstaking path of negotiation, building majority alliances, and so on and so forth. We see this happen with enlargement, when Bulgaria, out of the blue, blocked the opening of negotiations with North Macedonia. We see this done in NATO, with Turkey blocking Sweden currently. So, to be honest, I think on the one hand, it's what Romania is trying to do now is as much as it can do under the circumstances. Ideally, we would have done this years ago, much more energetically, before it came to this. On the other hand, I think this is something we perhaps might need to raise within the EU with the other member states, that this is behavior that should not be tolerated, because we're going to have to reach important decisions soon enough at EU level. If this is going to become common practice, if everybody's going to flex their muscles and then say, you block me, I can block you, or I can block some other country, and so on and so forth, this is really not going to help us moving forward. So I think, there can be no question of reopening treaties, changing the voting procedure when we have a war on our border, but political costs can be associated to this kind of behavior. So there's where perhaps Romania and Sweden, having been on the losing end of such experiences recently, can work together in the future.
Absolutely. Because you mentioned NATO and Sweden, moving on to my next questions, what were the main factors that made Sweden historically choose to change its neutrality and to apply for a NATO membership? Was it 24 February? What was it, a process that started with 2014, Crimea? Or what was, is there an exact timeline where, okay, we're doing this?
Well, I think what triggered it was really 24th of February, the war of aggression, the start of the war, Putin's aggression war on Ukraine, really. Of course, there have been political parties in Sweden that have been advocating for Sweden in NATO since a number of years, but they were always in a minority. There has never been a majority of the population in favor of NATO. Rather, we have been comfortable, and we have seen the Swedish people saw it as a good policy for our safety and security to be a non-member of any military alliance. We haven't been neutral in that sense because we're part of EU, and also, of course, we've had a very close partnership with NATO since 1994, basically. But we never took that step. So what's changed it? Even though, of course, we reacted, being in the neighborhood and having hundreds of years of history with Russia and the Russian Empire. Of course, we saw the war in Georgia. We saw the invasion, the illegal annexation of Crimea, and now this, and the continuous abuse of the frozen or protracted conflicts as the weak spots which Russia can pressure in different ways. So this we've been acutely aware of, but it did not trigger the NATO question until 24th of February, and together with Finland. It was important for us that this first steps were taken together with Finland for several reasons. I mean, historically, we're there at the same sort of eastern front towards Russia, even though they have the border. But also we have a quite extensive military cooperation already. And this is, of course, now what we hope to be as soon as possible completing even the Finnish full membership of NATO by having Sweden as well, because our defenses are also linked in a way. We do depend on each other. Finland does depend on Sweden also, so that's why it is important to have Sweden on the inside of NATO as well.
Although we understand that the whole thing that's happening with Turkey and the delay, it's a diplomatic and a political process, and it takes time. Can you, however, are you hopeful that it's going to happen this year, or can you share anything with us?
We were invited in Madrid in July last year, and in Vilnius, we will be having 1 year after that invitee status. So on the basis of NATO's open door policy, we should be in by then, because we are fulfilling the criteria and we're bringing something to the table. So that's what we're expecting. Today, as we stand, there is still the agreement between Sweden and Turkey and Finland on the steps to be taken, and we are being reminded by Turkey of the need to do more. There are negotiations on a technical level or discussions on technical level for that, but beyond that we are patient and awaiting the green light both from Hungary and from Turkey, and we expect that should come by Vilnius.
It should. Quick last question, Oana. What does it mean for the region, for NATO, Finland and Sweden in NATO?
Well, symbolically, it means a lot. And the Finnish NATO membership already means a lot, because that's a long border with Russia that NATO has. I would say, again, in practical terms, both Sweden and Finland have worked so closely with NATO. They're so interoperable. We are completely compatible on security interests, that it doesn't make that much of a difference whether they're in or they're out. But obviously, being in means a different level of commitment. It means different opportunities, new opportunities to work together. And I think for Romania, a very important moment to learn to work with partners that are like-minded, even more than until now, because we have our very clear foreign policy and security orientation, strategic partnership with the US, partnership with the UK, and so on and so forth. But I think we have so much in common in terms of outlook on the security situation with the Scandinavian countries, with the Baltics, that it would be very good to learn to diversify even more.
Well, I'm hoping it's going to happen as soon as possible. Your Excellency, Oana, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to chat today, and hopefully we'll see you back here again anytime soon. To those watching us, thank you for being with us, and to our next episode, say goodbye.